Hello, salam, shalom, namaste, sat sri akal, aloha, hola, ciao, bonjour, buna, and privyet. It's really, really good to be with you again, and you will be really happy you're with us because we have a very awesome guest with us today, and it's Hanifa Menen, who is a grief recovery and brain retraining guide. I think that is so cool. Welcome, Hanifa.
Thank you so much, Samia. Thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. I'm so happy you're here with us. And I will ask you to please, first of all, tell us more about who you are and what you do.
Alrighty then. Thank you for that welcome. And I loved all of the hellos you said in every language. It was so beautiful. So I can tell you that, yes, my name is Hanifa Menen. I am a grief recovery and brain retraining guide, as you mentioned. I used to be a naturopathic doctor for 21 years, and I feel that this movement into grief recovery and brain retraining has been very beneficial to the clients that I work with, largely because it focuses on self-empowerment. And that to me is something that a lot of times when people are working with healthcare professionals, there becomes a reliance on the professional for direction and for treatment and for management. And I believe that people have the strength to be empowered themselves. And I feel that's the greatest gift that any practitioner can help their clients achieve or patients achieve. And I'm doing this today and I'm loving it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that because I agree with you that a lot of times we do develop dependence on, because, oftentimes we see our doctors and healthcare professionals that we're trusting them with our lives, and there's a tendency to just sort of, um, in some ways, I don't know if taking for granted is the right word, but probably not the right word. But, we do develop a dependence and a reliance on their knowledge. And, um, of course, uh, in its own way, that's really important. Because if you don't have a healthy, trusting relationship with your healthcare providers, I mean, that would create its own problems. And at the same time, we do have to, I think, recognize that ultimately it's our bodies, and we have um, to realize that we have to be the experts of our own bodies and our own lives. You make me think of my dad, who has always been the person in our family who has raised our consciousness when it comes to these kinds of issues. He's amazingly practiced at being aware of what's happening with his body. So when he's not feeling well, or even when he's receiving treatment, he's able to observe the impact that it's having on him. And so when I have had the opportunity to visit a healthcare professional with him, and he is communicating with with the care provider about what's going on with him, he's able to be so detailed and just um, is like an excellent patient in that sense, because he's able to tell the healthcare provider, okay, you gave me this medication and it had this impact on me, or I've been experiencing these symptoms.
That
And
basic
yeah,
self-awareness. That's a
yeah.
wonderful basic self-awareness for sure.
Indeed, indeed. And I have always been in amazement of it, because I try to be inspired by his example. And I must say, in the recent years, I have been becoming better with my own body awareness. But for most of my life, I've had pretty terrible body awareness. So
Well, it's very interesting that different things in our lives bring us to that space of even an interest in having that awareness. It's probably a background awareness for most people. And yet there's also, you had said the word, I think it's a reliance. Um, so this reliance on others. It's nice to be able to have an equal reliance on ourselves, right? So if
Mhm.
we feel that I can only be reliant on something outside of me, it does give the illusion that only something outside of me can help me.
Yeah.
And again, if we look at healthcare, we know there's so much tied in with this. There is so much, whether we think political, whether we think governmental, whether we think financial, there are directions that are being pointed at people constantly. And then there's this faith, this faith without even fully understanding all those little background cues that are happening that in healthcare we do understand, but even in healthcare, I think a lot of times even healthcare practitioners can turn a blind eye to that because of course, if a healthcare practitioner's whole income is dependent on people needing them, then they're also dependent on people needing them. So then it
Yeah.
goes back and forth that way. So it's again, it's just an awareness to have on all sides, right? Which again in itself could be a grief awareness that, that brings me some feeling of loss if I'm that open about, you're as strong as I am. And should it bring a loss or a feeling of empowerment on both sides, right? So when I train you to be empowered, it empowers me too, right? Whereas in historically, I believe the way that healthcare professionals have been trained and have been encouraged to move in the world has been more about I'm the expert and I will help you understand, right? That sort of idea. And so then that becomes that space of dependence, as you said, and on both sides.
Yes. I hear
Yeah.
you. I hear you. You know, wow, so a couple of threads that I would love to uplift from what you were just sharing. First, maybe just an observation about something that I love about you.
Fun.
That every time we have a conversation, I notice you raising awareness about limiting beliefs that we can form uh, without necessarily even realizing it. For example, right now, you just raised awareness around how we can develop a limiting belief around, what this idea of, oh, I need someone or something outside of myself to be able to help myself in the context of my health and other issues as well, I'm sure. So I find that really important, being aware of our limiting beliefs because they are limiting.
They are, and you know what's so interesting from it? It's this idea of we're all the same. We're all the same. So even when we think about limiting beliefs, we
Mm,
can see much more similarity amongst all of us. But we have a tendency to differentiate that, okay, this is a practitioner, this is a healthcare provider, this is a parent, this is a child, this is someone older than me, someone younger than me. And then we have all these, but it's all of us are carrying all of this. In the collective consciousness, we're all the same. We're all receiving the same information. So to be aware of it helps all of us, right? So this is what I believe.
indeed.
And I believe you are very self-aware yourself. I honestly think that, again, it's only when we actually pay attention to, hey, I actually do get that. I just haven't spent time thinking about it or becoming more aware of it, right?
Mhm,
That sort of
mhm.
idea.
So the second thing that I heard you mentioned, although in passing, but I think I would love to focus our conversation today on that, is the idea of grief recovery, because I know that you have a really excellent way of understanding that, and I would love to learn more about grief recovery from you. Um, Please tell me more.
I'd be so happy to. This is my passion. And grief recovery is a process of working through. It's a particular model of working with grief. And a lot of people have heard the word grief, and many people will link it to things like death or divorce, sometimes separation, sometimes a move, um, something about loss and grief often linked to loss of relationships, and I think in common language. In grief recovery specifically, we look at grief as any experience that has a conflicting emotion. And that could be any two emotions, any two different emotions. So let's say we can easily think of someone who is caregiving for an ailing parent, for example, and the parent passes away. So then a person would feel that, oh, because the person passed away, this is a grief situation. But there might be a relief in the person too that, oh, I couldn't handle seeing them suffer, or I couldn't handle the strain it was having on me. And so there's a little bit of relief as well as the grief of the experience. But the other thing can happen too is good, fantastic situations that we think of. So you think of someone getting married, it's like so exciting and let's hope like it's the person that they're in love with, right? And they're getting married to this person. So excited. But so there is this excitement about getting married and this whole new experience and a little bit of fear of, oh, I'm going to be losing where I was living or my independence, or maybe a person's with their family still, or maybe they're living independently. Either way, it's a change. So there's a little bit of fear as well as the excitement. So that's a conflicting emotion, which would then, in this process, be called grief. And
Mm.
then recovering over grief, where most people think about, I just got to get over this. It's not so much about this recovering because it is an impact on the body. And if you think of this conflicting emotion, can you imagine how many we're all carrying? So whether we're starting a new job, that can be a grief situation. I let go of the old job, but I'm in a new job. And even if it's all very exciting, there's still that loss of the old job. Then there's that I had a great relationship with my boss in my old workplace, and now this boss and I don't get along. So another grief, but it's thing after thing after thing. So even starting school and finishing school
Mm.
is starting of a school. It's like something exciting, but fearful because it's something new. And then the finishing of school is so exciting to be finishing, but what am I going to do now? All of those things are grief situations. So everyone is carrying quite a bit of grief from this perspective.
Yes.
Mm,
You're so right about that. You're so right about that. I mean, we carry conflicting emotions all the time. And
we do.
and I think this is truly like when it comes to mental health, when it comes to emotional intelligence, I think this is a point of struggle for like so many people that when they have conflicting emotions, they 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 don't know how to go about processing them or even feeling about the fact that they have conflicting emotions and how to manage them, um, and things like that. So can you tell me a little bit more about your perspective maybe on the role of emotions? Um, I mean, hey, thanks for tuning into this episode. Hope you're getting value out of it. For your information, this episode has been sponsored by the Happiness 101 program. Are you a change maker, coach, trainer, or healer? Are chains of fear holding you back from making the impact and income you desire? Using a unique combination of positive psychology and the spiritual wisdom of our most effective change makers, the Happiness 101 program helps you break through your limiting beliefs and manifest the abundance and success you desire with fun and ease. Interested? Book a free Happiness 101 exploration call with me, your happiness expert, Samia Bano. Just use my online calendar link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
I, yeah,
Yes.
I would love to expand on that. Actually, it's a beautiful question, Samia. So I believe I'm understanding the direction. So if I take a different direction, you remind me what you really mean then. Okay. So if in my interpretation I've understood correctly, this whole idea of emotions, we haven't, many people have not really been trained about their emotions anyway. So it's something that we just kind of, oh yeah, well, people have sadness, people have happiness, people have, so it's just taken as it's part of life and you'll learn how to deal with it
Yeah.
as you go along. And
Yeah.
we can. But not many people are shown the importance of it, of understanding our emotions. So then when we are actually at a space where we actually want to understand, it's usually at a time of crisis. So I'm so sad, let's say in a grief situation, I need to know how to work with this. And then we just focus on sadness.
Yeah.
And this is the thing about grief recovery. We don't look at just sadness. We look at sadness and joy. We look at sadness or anxiety. We can look at worry. There's all these different emotions that are coming up as this grief picture. And that conflicting emotion, again, that you were right in mentioning emotional intelligence, because once we're understanding emotions, then we can learn from them. I would love to direct people. It's so ironic. I'm just in the middle of writing an article, and I will give just a little bit of direction to any of your listeners. Anyone who has not read a particular poem by Rumi called The Guest House, I would strongly encourage that. And in this whole idea is about being welcoming to each guest as emotions that come to us. So each one that's flowing through. If we have resistance at the door, believe me, we will definitely see that visitor again, or the visitor will just be standing outside our door the whole time. So unless we're actually acknowledging this is here and welcoming it, because it's our fear that holds us back from that too, right? That what if I can't handle anxiety? What if I can't handle grief? What if I can't? That sort of idea. But no one says that about joy or happiness, right?
Yes.
Recognize emotions. We recognize emotions are all transient. They come, they go,
Yes.
right? But to be able to manage them and actually to learn from them and to actually move forward that, okay, now if we understand that grief is affecting all of us, can I be more compassionate to someone else who's going through a completely
Yeah.
different experience than me? Right? So they've lost a parent. I've lost a parent. I
Yeah.
haven't. But if that has happened, and not recently, and if that has happened, we know that this is the whole idea of it's okay for them to handle it in this way. This is their connection with their parent. This is their way of dealing. Some people will go to the cemetery very regularly to visit a parent that's buried. Another person might rather not visit, or perhaps they had had a cremation. And there's all sorts of judgments that people put into all of these things too, rather than just acknowledging that this is how this person is working through their grief. This is how, and it's okay.
Yeah.
We've stopped being okay about differences, right? And this is what happens in life, that as we become more and more particular about things should be this way, hence how
Mm,
I see it is how you should see it, that's what creates more conflict in the world.
right. And the limiting beliefs, because you
Right.
think things can only be this way. Yes.
Yeah, if
Um,
we come back to this idea of loss in
yeah.
even a family,
Yeah.
everyone, there could be 5 siblings that lose a parent, and each sibling is going to handle it slightly differently. And often right within this family, each sibling is judging another. They shouldn't be thinking about this long. They should be over it by now, or they should come with me to the cemetery, or whichever way, right? So all of these things that even within a family, if we can see this, we can see how we're affecting each other nationally, internationally, same thinking. Mhm.
It's so true. And our emotions have such a powerful impact on our thinking and vice versa. Like our thinking has a very powerful impact on our emotions and our emotions have a powerful impact on our thinking. So they're definitely sort of like feeding each other. And so, when it comes to the judgment piece, um, being aware of our emotions and how they're impacting our emotions is so critical because you can't even really begin to change your thoughts around an issue unless you are also, um, managing your feelings around it and shifting your feelings around it insofar as they may need to be shifted in order to shift the mindset. Because there's no way you can begin to think a different way about something unless you're also able to begin to feel a different way about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think we're expanding into a lot of different areas. If we're looking at grief recovery, I know it's almost like it's a narrowed down way of looking, even though it seems more expansive, right? It seems like, okay, we're looking at all emotions, but we're even expanding beyond, right? So if we look at emotions in general and we think, oh, if I can change my emotions, that's very much how a medical model would look at it, right? That,
Mm.
okay, we need to get over fear, we need to get over grief, or we need to know how to manage this. And we don't think that way about happiness or joy, right? But they're both emotions. So again, when I come back to that reference of Rumi,
Yeah.
this idea of these emotions, they come and they go. And if we can just give them some attention, right? That's what we do. Like it doesn't take anyone to tell us to give happiness attention because when it's here, we're really excited about it. But when we've got sadness or grief, we give it a lot of less than positive attention. We will judge ourselves, as we
Yeah.
said, we're talking about judgment, that we'll judge ourselves, but then we'll judge others about it too.
Yeah.
That, right? So in that, but then we look at thought too. And I know, this is my world. So I'm making sure that I'm sharing with your
Yeah.
clients as much as possible. And it's a lot of information. But when we think about thought, if you can remember that thought today is based on my experience yesterday. So
Mm.
my thought today is based on my experience yesterday, which shapes how I think today. Today's thought is yesterday filtering through this present moment into projection into the future. So when I think of changing my thoughts, unless I'm able to clear my mind of my past thought, I'm just carrying along the past to my future,
Right. Right.
right?
That is so true. That is so true. So like in the way that I might frame that is our thoughts are basically a result of the beliefs that we hold, and our beliefs are formed on the basis, primarily on the basis of our experiences. So I'm on board with you about that. And I also, um, I think the thing I would love to dig deeper with you right now is this idea that you bring up about when we have what we generally think of as the positive emotions like happiness and joy. You're so right that we take them for granted in the sense that you were saying that we don't feel a need to pay attention to them. And, we don't think about, um, yeah, it's just like, oh, I'm happy. So it's fine. But for sure, like as a happiness expert, that is something that I am always working on for myself and with my clients where I'm like, no, we really do need to pay attention to when we're feeling happy, when we're feeling joy, when we're feeling peace, when we're feeling calm, because all of these emotions are in fact giving us signals as well of what we're doing right and what our mind, our body, our heart needs us to do more of. Because just as we need to pay attention to what not to do, we need to pay attention to what to do.
Mhm.
That is really, and it actually, this reminds me of, in our scripture, the Quran, that's the scripture for the Muslims. It so often when it talks about doing good, it also talks about don't do evil
Mhm.
and do good. So it's like you can't just not do evil, you also have to do good, or you can't just do good, you also have to not do evil.
Mhm. Yeah, they
Uh,
go hand in hand. It's like two sides of one coin. Yeah.
yes. And it also actually makes me think about a more specific story that's more specifically related to the emotional aspect of things and the point you were making before. And this is a story related to a scholar whose name I cannot remember, but the story goes something like this, that the scholar was actually with a group of his students and he was teaching, and some person came from outside and they went up to the teacher. The scholar and they said something in the person's ear. And the scholar took a pause and he seemed to like give a moment of reflection on something silently. He didn't say anything. And then he proceeded to teach his class. And then after some time went by, this person came back into the room, went to the scholar, said something in their ear. And once again, the scholar seemed to take a moment, like took a pause and seemed to take a moment to reflect on something and then just continued to teach. And after class was over, some of the students asked the scholar, would you mind sharing with us what happened when this person came in? What did they say? What were you thinking about? Like, what was going on there? Would you mind sharing with us? And so the scholar is like, I'm happy to tell you. So he says the first time the person came, he gave me news that a trade ship that I had invested in sank. And so basically uh, and like all of my investment basically um, sank with it, right? So big loss. And he said, in that moment, as I um, processed the news, I was checking how I was feeling about it. And after a moment of reflection, I noticed or I realized that because that I was able to feel calm about the situation because I've trust in God that God will take care of everything. And so I moved on and, we continued with our class. And then the second time that the person came, he gave the news that there had been a mistake made and it was not my ship, but my investments that sank. It was some other ship and my ship and my investments are actually just fine. And so in this case also, as I heard the news, I processed it news and I reflect, I was noticing how I was feeling and I was satisfied to note that in this instance also I was able to reach a place of calm feeling because I trust God and believe that God is taking care of everything and all will be well.
It's beautiful. That's it. That's how life is, isn't it? It's and that's a beautiful story, Samia. It's thank you for sharing it. And
Yeah.
it's true about life, isn't it? It's to have that steadiness no matter what arises is beautiful. And so many different ways to look at the emotions that most people would go through in either of those times, right? The disappointment and the elation, right? So very easy for anyone to relate to that. Oh, how would I feel in that situation? And yeah, most people would show a lot more emotion in that, but it takes a steady mind to be that even temper in both, right?
Right. I mean, there's that we want to cultivate the steady mind, but also the idea of not getting attached to either emotion, whether it's the shock and the grief of loss, or whether it's the elation, the joy of, oh, everything's fine, I'm still rich, or whatever, because now I'm thinking about, another thing that we talk a lot about in the context of my work as a happiness expert is, so many people have this mindset of chasing happiness where, I mean, ultimately, I do believe that that we all want and desire to be happy and peaceful in our lives. But a lot of times people have this mindset of chasing happiness chasing the good life. And so because they have this mindset, they're always, trying to figure out what's that next thing, the next thing, and the next thing that's going to help them feel happy. And in that quest, they actually go far astray and end up doing all kinds of things that have the opposite impact, that actually end up compromising their ability to experience happiness now.
Mhm.
And or even actually, for that matter, achieving happiness in the future, because it's like that's just not a happiness promoting mindset. So even to get attached to like a in this way of where you're like not okay with not feeling happy, it can create problems.
Yes, it can. It can. Attachment for sure. And I think you mentioned two words, want and desire, which are pretty powerful words too, right? So if is someone in a space of wanting or in a space of desire,
Mhm.
yes, it does bring the awareness of satisfaction that's already there. So this is certainly what in our world we've encouraged, supported, created, all of that, right? So in that, it's an important understanding for us to have about the human psyche and just understanding. But yeah, it's definitely so that's good. Like I think you're doing fantastic work in terms of happiness. And then in terms of just so it's clear, in grief recovery, it's not so much about getting to happiness and pulling away from grief, but so just so that's clear, but recognizing that both are happening simultaneously for
Yes.
sure.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And like you said, to appreciate both and to listen to the message that each is trying to give you, because what we talk about in my work is that every emotion is there to give you some feedback on, what you're needing, and and so in the context of what we might term negative emotions, you're getting feedback of something that you need, or like a need that's not being met. And so your heart, your mind, your body, they're trying to give you a clue about what to do, or what direction to move in, so that you can meet that need that's not being met. And like I was saying earlier with the positive emotions, the feedback is, hey, we want more of this. So it's just about listening to that feedback, and honoring it and doing what you can to um, to be guided by this feedback, because like, to have that trust that your body knows what it needs, that your inner self, your heart, can guide you towards what it needs, and that really, that inner guidance um, is the most trustworthy guidance for you.
Thanks for that, Samia. It's again, it sounds really good. From what I hear about the happiness focus, in my understanding of it, and again, this might not be the understanding that you're trying to convey. It sounds very straightforward. It sounds very much like psychology to me, like or psychotherapy, because it's very much about understanding. Okay, this emotion again used to utilize as giving us direction, that sort of idea.
Mm-hmm.
And in grief recovery, um, yes, emotion, I would say that it looks at it more as a totality, which I would think faith does too. So faith looks at everything as a totality. So even the story that you shared, I think that was very much about the totality, that if we look at that whole story together, we
Yeah.
can see that, yeah, neither the good nor the not so good stayed. It was all that total experience of
Yeah.
this happened, right?
Yeah.
That, I think, is one of the things that a lot of people are not so aware of. So rather than seeing the totality, because it always seems like it's too much. So if I can narrow it down and break it down into pieces, but
Yeah.
this again, this is the microcosm of the human individual experience reflecting the macrocosm of the world around us. When we thought about that, remember the world was one world, and then we created division, right? We created like, here's this country and this country. This is what we do in terms of emotions in ourselves. So in terms of, here's my happiness, here's my sadness, right? That which
Yes.
we stopped even looking at ourselves as complete. So if I treat this part of my body, I treat depression. If I treat depression, then I
Exactly.
also treat sleep, or that sort of
Yes.
idea,
Yes.
right? So it became very compartmentalized.
Yes. Yes. I take that point very well from you. And yes, when I talk about emotions, you're right. I am pulling into or from my learning in the context of positive psychology training. And at the same time, I do recognize there are different frames. One of the things I do appreciate about even the positive psychology framing and understanding of emotions is that, especially like in the context of thinking about happiness, um, for example, um, positive psychology research recognizes that in order for us to be happy in a sustainable way, where, we can sustain our happiness, we can be in control of our happiness. Um, it's not just about one thing. There are at least five different pillars of mental health that have been identified, and they include, like the broad pillars. So they include, like an awareness of and it paying an attention to your physical health, for example. So but then also there's another pillar of, well, looking at, are you living life with a sense of meaning and purpose? Are you utilizing your strengths that you have? Are you living in a way that, is authentic to your values and so forth? So that's like a whole a pillar of mental health. Then the other pillars, are about, um, do you have the skills and the knowledge to be resilient when the hard times hit? Because, again, it's an acknowledgement of the realities of our life, that not everything is always going to be like, a straight line or an upward line in terms of just what we perceive to be positive things happening all the time, or we will not always be experiencing what we label as positive emotions. And so when something happens that we perceive to be bad in our lives, like the sinking of the ship that carried all of my investments, how do you respond to that in the moment? But then also, how do you be resilient in that moment? So that's like its own pillar. And then one of the pillars that I will highlight now is that positive psychology also recognizes, is that of your sense of spiritual connection and spiritual development. And so, like, when you take this kind of broader perspective of happiness and what it means to be happy and how you can be happy, I think it starts to move us in more of that direction that you have been highlighting for us with the grief recovery model of, sort of looking at more of the totality of the situation and everything that we are and that we're experiencing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I hope so. I do believe, like, it's again, from I can see the totality with those 5 pillars that you're utilizing, which is again what even Western
Yes.
medicine,
Yes.
right? Even when we look at Western medicine, for the longest time, it's been the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual
Mhm.
aspects. Yet, then when we actually look at the actuality of what's happening, often it is first work with this and then work with this.
Yes.
Right? So it
Yes.
becomes really differentiated. And
Yes.
that is something like just someone like I'm sure your clients, when you work with them, you're chatting with them about how to combine it all together, right? So that it just feels like, okay, in this, I'm doing all of it. And this is the same idea in terms of grief recovery too, that it's the same. This is how we look at the whole thing, even though we recognize that these different pieces are existing, but it's all happening simultaneously, that sort of idea
Yes. Yes. Yes.
allows our minds to integrate again, right? We've become very dissociative in our thinking in terms of this is here. Even when we think about, I can talk about grief to my psychotherapist, I can talk about grief to my family, but when I'm at work, I can't talk about it, I can't think about it. And meanwhile, we're the same person in every situation that we're in, right? So if we've got the
Yes.
two, we can actually manage at work and we can actually manage at home because the
Yes.
process of working on this is what we're carrying.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That is such an excellent point. And now you've reminded me of a conversation I was having with one of my friends who is a trauma survivor herself and now is also doing amazing work as a disability justice person. And um, and so we were having a conversation about disability justice in the context of the workplace. Because in the context of disability justice work, we also recognize mental trauma or mental disorders, that impact our lives as as forms of disability, or that can have disabling impacts, I should say, on our lives. And so, for example, somebody who is a survivor of abuse or other trauma, um, and they are still in that phase of either they are currently going through the crisis or in the very early stages of recovery from that crisis, their mental health is impacted by that. And that impacts not only their life at home, but it's also impacting their life at work. And what happens in the context of disability justice work is that exactly like you were saying, there's this expectation in society of compartmentalization, that you leave behind whatever is happening in your personal life outside of work. That when you're at work, you just focus on work, but it's not really possible, especially when you're dealing with I mean, if what you're dealing with at home is or the trauma or the issues or challenges you're dealing with, if they're relatively mild, maybe you can leave that behind when you're at work. But when there's a major, when you're experiencing a major trauma, and struggling to recover from that, it is going to impact every area of your life, and you
And
cannot leave it out. Yeah.
what's interesting, Sammy, is who's determining whether it's mild or not,
I
right?
mean, yes.
So
So
it brings up a lot, right? When you even say this, in
yes,
my opinion, anyways,
yes,
I get it. In terms of when we look at, insurances would cover a certain amount in terms of um, the workplace itself. We'll look at things from its own perspective. The family may or may not be forgiving of now spending more time at work and you're supposed to be here. So that who measures that trauma or that strain or that, right? So even when there is someone who is very clearly going through a grief. Let's
Yes.
say a mother has lost a child.
Yes.
So that happens, excuse me. Let me take one more sip of water here. When a mother has lost a child and then a sibling has lost a sibling,
Mm.
who determines who is affected more? Right? So when we think
Yeah.
about this,
Yes.
this is why when we're looking at how society is shaping itself,
Right.
we're not just doing things purely out of compassion. So then what happens? A person knows that they can get potentially
Yeah.
some compassion, maybe for compassionate leave, or sick leave. Let's say everyone's aware that, oh, no one wants a diagnosis. We know this. And
Yeah.
yet, you look at why depression and anxiety are the highest diagnosed conditions right now. How much of it is this is actually happening? How much of it is that the mind is leading itself to that space because it needs that break from work so badly,
Yeah.
right? So all of
Yeah.
this, and this is what we as a society have said, well, if someone has this, then they can have time
Yes.
off.
Exactly. 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 That's exactly what my friend was trying to highlight. And that this is a problem, that this way of thinking, because ultimately, I guess, yes. And so the fact that, again, we should not sit in judgment of either our emotions or other people's emotions. I mean, especially like other people's emotions in this, when it comes to our relationships, it's like, how can you even begin to judge someone else's emotions? You can't feel what they're feeling. You can't, you don't, you cannot experience what they're experiencing. So how can you judge it?
Mhm.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like,
No, it's it's very uh, normal, has become very normalized though, right?
yeah.
That, or I believe it has. I think because we're not starting with understanding compassion for ourselves, then we're not so compassionate towards others either. So when we fully understand our own experiences, not to be selfishly understanding, but understanding that, wow, this is a huge impact on me in all of these ways. Now I can actually understand someone else too. When we don't even understand ourselves, and what's the time being given to understanding ourselves? The only time we give to understanding ourselves is when crisis hits, right?
Yeah.
It's and then that's become the cycle in life that
Yes.
finish this, understand this, and then get to the emotion. So now
Yes.
that you've done this X, Y, Z, now you can work on this. This is almost like the fun time. Now you get to understand emotions, which is really, I mean, it's always been part of the totality of the picture. And
Yes.
our society is shaping us too, right? That we can see that, wow, with so much grief in the entire world, we're all taking this on, whether we see it in TV, whether we see it in,
Yes.
hear it in the radios, we watch it in movies, all of these things. And we're also less sensitive to it too,
Yeah.
because we see so much of it,
Yes.
right?
That's
So
very true. Very.
when we are able to watch movies that have so much aggression and violence, we become less sensitive to it. So
Yeah.
then in every city, when we hear about this is how many murders have happened in a month, no one's surprised anymore. Almost any number can
Yes.
be said, and it's just kind of a way of life. Now, when we're not even aware of that outside of us, we're certainly not aware of inside us too. It's going both ways.
Yes.
If we get that awareness within ourselves, oh, we'll have that compassion then stepping out to the world,
Yeah.
which makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yes. Ah,
So much. We've expended so much, Samia. Do you think that we've overwhelmed the listeners?
I mean, it's probably a good idea for us to wrap up for today. It's just you keep bringing up so many excellent points. I can't help myself asking the next question and the next question. But you're right. Let's move towards wrapping up for today. Do you have any last thoughts or words you'd like to share?
I'd love to share the fact that working through grief, which would mean grief recovery. Again, grief recovery is just the term, but if anyone who is watching is understanding that we're carrying a lot of conflicting emotions within ourselves, when we can look at things equally, we will look from within ourselves equally and we'll look outside ourselves equally. And that, I believe, can bring the peace to ourselves and to the world around us that we're all deserving.
Indeed. So on that very positive and hopeful and wise note, we will wrap up for today. And for my last reminder, I will remind you who's listening to please make sure you check the show notes because we will be adding Hanifa's links in the show notes so you can reach out to her, learn even more from her, get some help and support whenever you're ready for it. And until we connect next time, I just wish you lots and lots of peace and joy.
Namaste, everyone.